Hey everyone, I'm Anya Esma, and today I want to talk to you about archetypes because a lot of you ask me about them and how I work with them. So today I not only want to share with you a few archetypes that I specifically work with, but I also want to talk about levels on which I work with these archetypes. So different archetypes are kind of on different levels for me, and this is not a hierarchy, but just something that has naturally come up, because with some archetypes I do one thing, with others I do another. And maybe in the course of this video you can also think how you would categorize your own archetypes that you work with. The first thing that I want to address is, why do I call these archetypes? Because a lot of them are characters from video games, from movies, from books. And I just want to make clear that an archetype is something that kind of underlies the character that we visually see in a movie, in a video game, or imagine in a book. The archetype is kind of the underlying character structure, and there are certain terms for certain groups of archetypes. We will get into that in a minute, but I just want to make clear that as long as you work with the essence of a character or one specific attribute of a character, you can call that working with an archetype, at least in my opinion. There will be people who say, no, that's not what an archetype is. Archetypes are just on the highest level of abstraction, no specific characters, but that's not how I see it. So I just wanted to make clear why I call this working with archetypes. So let us finally get into the video and the 3 ways in which I personally interact with archetypes. The first level of archetypes that I want to talk about are those archetypes that you do not call upon necessarily. You just sort of know that they exist, and it makes you happy that they exist. And sometimes you will feel good when you feel their energy, when you remember their imagery, when you remember who they are. And for me, this relates quite strongly to the wild woman archetype, or the wolf woman archetype, the Amazonian, depending on what you want to call it. Specifically women who live with animals or have been socialized with animals and live a very free, intuitive life. And 2 archetypes that I work with here are Princess Mononoke from the movie Princess Mononoke. And I think she is a very beautiful display of a fierce woman who only lives with wolves, only lives with nature, and is very in tune and fights for what is important with nature. And then you have Sniper Wolf from the Metal Gear Solid series. Now, she is a very different character. I have often seen her as kind of a magician because she has an immense amount of focus, an immense amount of drive when it comes to what her intention is and what her goal is. And she also surrounds herself with wolves and kind of uses them as partners in her quest. I have never specifically called about either of those 2, but I still know that they exist, and it still gives me a good feeling when I remember them. I remember the magician's nature when I think of Sniper Wolf, or I remember that connected, in tune with nature, but at the same time fierce and forthcoming Princess Mononoke type of character. Now, if you have a relationship with archetypes like this, that doesn't mean it's superficial. It just means that they are kind of on the sideline. They are just energies that surround you and that you like to surround yourself with without probably specifically calling upon them. So maybe your relationship with them is still developing in a way. The second level that I want to speak about is when you have an archetype where you think, what would X do? What would that archetype do when you're trying to make a decision? For me, this intersects with being my psychic muscle. If I know I have to get something done, I have to make a tough decision, or I have to take a risk, I have to do something that I am not comfortable with and that I am not quite large enough to do in my psychic development, then there are archetypes that I will call upon to help me with that. And that is essentially the second level of archetypes. So this combination of what would this archetype do and how can I use it to take the risk that I need to take? How can I bring them in as psychic muscle to help me achieve what I want to achieve? And archetypes that fall in this group, for example, are sorceresses, because they are about self-sovereignty, they are about power, they are about making decisions and reaching your goals, not just with magical means, but also with pure intention and pure activity on the physical realm. Now, for example, Yennefer from Witcher is one of those characters that I work with, and I do specifically call upon her and I do converse with her, and I do wonder what would she do in order to help me make decisions sometimes and help me take risks. I have talked about this at length in my video about Yennefer. If you want to watch that, I will link it down below. And there are also other sorceresses from other video games, a variety that I relate to and that give me that kind of power boost that I need to really embody what I want to embody in this reality. The third level of archetypes that I want to speak about are those that you specifically call upon for nourishment, for guidance, to work magic with. And this kind of intersects with the other level I just talked about, but to me it is a little bit of a more intense relationship. And for me, this is the dark goddess archetype mostly. I work with Persephone and also some other kind of dark goddessy characters that embody playfulness, but at the same time a deep sense of darkness and of the guidance between the playfulness and the sunshine and the darkness and kind of what is below the surface. And that tension between the two is really what the dark goddess archetype lives off of, if you ask me. So for example, for me it is helpful to work through the light and the dark times. A very powerful sentence for me is "this too shall pass," in all of its aspects, in the good sense and the bad sense, and also to work through change and transition, which can be both quite hard for me. So having a little bit of support there that I can literally call upon is very important. Another person that I work with is Yotsuyu from Final Fantasy XIV. Now, it all kind of mixes and comes together in a weird way because I don't call upon Yotsuyu very often, but she is very present in my mind. So I can't really say, okay, she's this level or that level. And I'm not saying that it's helpful to necessarily categorize archetypes like that, but I think it's good for me to know what relationships I have and how I can name them with archetypes. So those three levels are the most relevant to me personally. If you work with archetypes on a different level, let me know, because you know there's also worship where you literally address them every day, you give them offerings every day, and I do not have a relationship with a deity or an archetype in that way. And by the way, the concept of deity and archetype very much overlap for me, as you may have noticed. I just wanted to note that. It's not like that for everybody, I'm sure. But yes, those three levels, you have the archetypes that you don't call upon, but you like that they exist. You like surrounding yourself with them, thinking of them sometimes. They just kind of come to your mind. Then on the second level, you have that idea of what would this archetype do or this character do, and how can I use it for my personal development and call them in as kind of psychic muscle to support me in my quest. And then thirdly, you have the more nourishing, the more direct conversational relationship that you may have with a deity that you call upon to work magic, that you call upon when you feel low and you need support, you need guidance. There are a lot more archetypes that I work with, and maybe I will talk more about them in the future. If I've mentioned a character here that you want me to talk about, let me know in the comments. And I would love to hear what archetypes you work with, because I think it's always super inspiring to hear what people work with, whether it's from Hayao Miyazaki movies, for example, or from Harry Potter, from Lord of the Rings. All of those are very inspiring, but at the same time, of course, you have ancient gods and goddesses, and that is also a whole different, interesting route. And whether you work with, you know, gentle maidens, crazy free thinkers, nurturing mothers, lioness mothers, all of those archetypes are super interesting. And I have kind of characters on my mind for all of them that I sometimes work with. And yes, blah, blah, blah. I will get to the end now. I hope that you could kind of categorize some archetypes, kind of define the relationship that you have with them, and see if you want to switch any of them around, become more actively engaged with any of them, because, you know, at different times we need different archetypes. We're not going to need the same archetypes all the time. So that is quite important to say, I think, because you're not entering a lifelong bond with them. You are working with them, they are working with you, and that is really the core of it. I also talk about archetypes on Instagram. I have this highlight there that you can watch that's called Archetype Talks, I believe. So I will also link my Instagram below if you want to look there. I talk about the sorceress, the warrior, and some other archetypes down there. And yeah, I will also link all of my other resources. If you want to join my Patreon, that would support my YouTube channel, support my video making, feel free to do that. And you also get more tarot spreads, more information about all the witchy goodness. And yeah, I think that's about it. I wish you the greatest of days, the greatest of weeks, and I will see you very soon.